The night air was thick with fear. Every step she took echoed louder than the last, bouncing off the walls of a narrow suburban street that seemed to stretch forever. Her name was Alicia, and she was running, not from a dream, but from the man who had turned her life into a waking nightmare. Streetlights flickered above her, casting long, trembling shadows on the wet pavement. Behind her, the sound of heavy boots, slow, calculated, a reminder that he wasn't chasing. He was enjoying the hunt. Her phone battery blinked red. The nearest police station was miles away, and in a town where her skin color had already made her unwelcome, she knew calling for help might only bring more danger. Then, through the mist, she saw them, a group of bikers, their engines rumbling low like thunder ready to break. They looked rough, leather jackets glinting under the streetlight, tattoos crawling up their arms. The kind of men people crossed the road to avoid, but desperation drowned out hesitation. She stumbled toward them, breath trembling, heart hammering. Behind her, the stalker smirked in the dark. Ahead, the bikers slowly turned toward the sound of her running steps, and that's where everything changed. The engines quieted to a low growl as Alicia stumbled into the glow of the streetlight. Her chest heaved, every breath jagged, her trembling hands clinging to the strap of her torn purse as if it were the only thing tethering her to reality. Rain misted against her face, mixing with the sweat and fear that clung to her skin. The bikers stared, not with menace, but with confusion. They weren't used to seeing someone like her here. This part of town was an industrial stretch, known more for late-night deliveries and neon bars than for terrified women running barefoot through puddles. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with streaks of silver in his beard, killed his engine and lifted his helmet. His name was Rhett, a name whispered in the area with a mix of respect and warning. Alicia tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She turned her head, searching the darkness behind her. Nothing but silence. The stalker had disappeared. Or maybe he was just waiting, watching. The thought made her knees weaken. Rhett's gaze softened. He could read fear. He'd seen it in veterans, in addicts, in the broken who came through the back alleys begging for another chance at life. But this fear was different. It carried the raw edge of survival. He stepped closer, keeping his voice steady but low. "You all right?" She didn't answer, only shook her head and pointed back the way she came. Her lips parted just enough to whisper, He's coming." The bikers exchanged glances. Their group, 6 riders strong, wasn't exactly a welcoming committee. They were rough men and women, the kind who had seen too much of the world's cruelty to flinch at it anymore. But there was something about this girl. Her shaking form, the exhaustion etched into her face, the bruises on her arm, that pulled a silent, shared understanding between them. Rhett nodded once, and one of the younger bikers, Cass, moved his bike to block the road. The rest followed without needing a word. Alicia's legs finally gave out, and she sank onto the curb. For the first time in hours, she stopped running. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was loaded, heavy with the tension of unseen danger. She looked up at the flickering streetlight, every nerve in her body screaming that this might still not be over. She could feel eyes on her. Somewhere out there in the dark, her stalker was smiling. The bikers waited, some leaning on their bikes, others scanning the shadows. Rhett crouched beside her, the smell of gasoline and rain mixing in the air. "You want us to call the cops?" he asked. Alicia hesitated. The question wasn't simple. In her neighborhood, the police didn't protect. They questioned. They doubted. They made victims explain why they were victims. She thought of the last time she'd called them, how they'd asked what she was wearing, why she had been out alone. Her silence was answer enough. Rhett didn't press. He stood, cracked his knuckles, and motioned toward the others. "Stay close." A few moments later, a shadow moved at the far end of the street. Tall, calm, purposeful. He wasn't hiding anymore. The stalker had followed her here. The bikers noticed him almost immediately. Cass revved his engine once, not as a warning, but as a dare. The low thunder rolled through the street, echoing off the walls. The man stopped, hands in his pockets, a faint grin pulling at his lips. He didn't look frightened. He looked entitled. Rhett stepped forward, the rest fanning out behind him like a wall of muscle and metal. Alicia watched from the curb, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The stalker tilted his head, speaking just loud enough for her to hear. "You think these people are going to save you?" His voice dripped with mockery. "You don't belong here, girl." "You never did," the word struck like a slap. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything she'd been told her whole life. Wrong place, wrong skin, wrong everything. Rhett took another step forward, his eyes narrowing. "She's with us now." The stalker chuckled as if the statement amused him. He glanced at the leather jackets, the patches, the roaring machines, and then at her, a young black woman crouched in the rain, surrounded by people society had labeled trouble. He didn't understand that sometimes it's the outcasts who stand guard over what's right. Lightning flashed somewhere far behind the clouds, briefly painting the street in white. For a moment, Alicia saw herself reflected in the puddles. Not a victim, but someone still breathing, still standing. The bikers weren't her family, but in this fragile moment, they were her shield. Rhett turned back to her. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "We don't let monsters walk our streets." She didn't know why, but she believed him. The engines roared again, a sound like thunder announcing a coming storm. The stalker hesitated, just for a second, as if realizing that the game he thought he controlled was shifting fast. Alicia gripped the curb, her heart steadying for the first time that night. The fear was still there, but now it had a pulse of defiance running through it, and as the bikers formed a line across the street, blocking the path between her and the man who'd hunted her, one truth became clear. This night wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. Rain began to fall harder now, a slow, relentless drizzle that washed the street in silver light. The engines rumbled steady, 6 machines idling like beasts waiting for command. Alicia sat behind the barrier of metal and muscle, her pulse sinking with the mechanical growl that seemed to shake the ground itself. The stalker stood motionless across the street. He wasn't frightened. If anything, he looked entertained. The smug curve of his lips told her everything. This wasn't the first time he'd hunted someone. He had the eyes of a predator who believed the law, the world, and every unfair system would protect him. Rhett took one step forward. "You got 5 seconds to turn around." The man didn't move. He slid his hands from his pockets and smirked. 5 seconds. "You people always think you own the street." He tilted his head toward Alicia, his tone turning colder. "She's the one trespassing. Doesn't belong here." The word hung in the air. Doesn't belong. It had followed Alicia all her life, at school, at work, even in the grocery aisles where strangers clutched their purses tighter when she walked by. She could feel it again now, cutting deeper because it came from a man who had stalked her, who believed she didn't even deserve to exist freely. Rhett's eyes hardened. He didn't care about the color of her skin, only about the fear in her eyes. Fear he'd seen in soldiers, addicts, survivors. To him, that was universal. "Wrong street," Rhett said. His voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. The kind of warning that came from a man who'd fought too many battles to bluff anymore. The stalker laughed and took a step forward. "What, you're her savior now? You and your little biker gang? You have no idea what she's like." Rhett didn't blink. "Don't need to." Cass revved his bike again. The sound split the night like a thunderclap. A few bar patrons from across the road peeked out through their foggy windows. The tension was magnetic, dangerous, and thick enough to taste. Then, flashing red and blue lights turned the corner. Alicia's stomach dropped. Her instinct should have been relief, but instead it was fear. She'd called for help before, and the help had looked at her like a suspect. The patrol car slowed near the intersection, headlights sweeping across the scene. One frightened black woman, 6 bikers, and one calm, clean-looking white man standing opposite them. The perfect recipe for misunderstanding. The stalker raised his hand with mock innocence. Officers. Thank God you're here, Rhett muttered something under his breath. He knew this game. He'd seen it before. Smooth talkers flipping the story before anyone could even breathe. Two officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters. One looked at Alicia for only a moment before turning his gaze toward Rhett. What's going on here? The stalker didn't wait. These men surrounded me. She's with them. I think they're trying to rob me. The lie hit like a punch. Alicia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She'd been silenced too many times by disbelief to think her voice would matter now. Rhett crossed his arms. He's lying. The shorter officer frowned. You all got IDs? Cass exhaled sharply. You kidding? We didn't do anything. IDs, the officer repeated, sharper now. Alicia forced herself to stand. He's been following me, she cried, her voice cracking under the weight of everything she'd held in. He's been stalking me for weeks. He broke into my car, left notes. But the taller officer's attention was still fixed on Rhett's tattoos, on the patches, on the jackets. Not on her words. Not on her fear. Her throat tightened. It was happening again, her truth shrinking beneath the shadow of stereotypes. And then Rhett spoke quietly, the way you do when anger finally cools into steel. Check his pockets, the officers hesitated. The stalker laughed, stepping back slightly, feigning offense. This is harassment. A small metallic clink hit the pavement. A switchblade dropped from his coat pocket. The silence that followed was heavy. The officer's flashlight hit the weapon, its wet blade glimmering under the rain. The taller cop bent down, eyes narrowing. That yours? The stalker's smirk faltered. That's not... Rhett didn't move, didn't smile. Just stared. You done lying? For a long second, the stalker's mask cracked. The charm vanished, replaced by pure hatred, the kind that hides behind polished smiles and handshakes, but never really dies. She thinks she can ruin my life, he hissed. She's just trying to live hers, Rhett replied. The officers exchanged glances. The shorter one finally stepped forward and grabbed the stalker's arm. Sir, you're coming with us. He resisted for a moment, then realized the street had already judged him. Not by his words, but by his weapon. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Alicia felt her knees weaken again, not from fear this time, but from the release of it. The world, for once, had tilted slightly toward fairness, but Rhett knew better. He'd seen how justice worked. It wasn't the end of the story. It was just a pause between battles. The officers radioed in, calling for backup, lights painting the walls red and blue. The stalker sneered as they led him away, muttering something about wasting their time. When the cars drove off, silence fell again. The bikers didn't cheer. They didn't move. They just stood there, letting the rain wash over them. Alicia turned to Rhett. Her voice was barely a whisper. Thank you, he shrugged. Don't thank me. Thank whoever taught you to keep running until someone finally listened. Cass handed her his jacket. You cold? She nodded, pulling it around herself. It smelled like oil and leather, but also safety. The group started their engines again, one by one. Rhett looked down the street where the patrol lights faded. You got somewhere safe to go? Alicia hesitated. I don't know anymore. Then you stay here tonight, he said. We'll make sure no one follows. She wanted to refuse, pride, fear, exhaustion, but her body betrayed her. She simply nodded. They led her to the old warehouse behind their bar, a place that looked rough on the outside, but felt strangely warm once inside. The walls were lined with old photographs, motorcycle parts, and a single tattered flag that read, Brothers Keep Watch. Alicia sat by the heater, hands wrapped around a mug someone handed her. The sound of rain on the metal roof became a lullaby. Rhett leaned against the wall, lighting a cigarette but not smoking it. He watched the door like a man who didn't trust quiet moments. Why'd you help me? She finally asked. He looked up, eyes tired but kind. Because no one helped my sister. That was all he said. The words hit harder than thunder. They carried history, pain, regret, redemption. Outside, the rain began to ease. The night slowly surrendered to dawn. For the first time in weeks, Alicia closed her eyes without fear. But as the light crept in through the cracks of the warehouse door, Rhett stayed awake, staring at the street. Because monsters rarely disappear for good. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they wear different faces. And he knew this wasn't over. The first rays of dawn stretched across the cracked windows of the old warehouse. The air was still heavy from the night's rain, and the smell of damp earth drifted in with the wind. Alicia stirred beneath Cass's jacket, her body sore but her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. For the first time in what felt like forever, silence didn't mean danger. It meant peace. Rhett was sitting by the doorway, a mug of cold coffee in his hands, eyes locked on the quiet street outside. He hadn't slept. Men like him didn't rest when something still felt unfinished. The other bikers were scattered around, half asleep, half alert. The old flag above them, Brothers Keep Watch, fluttered gently in the morning draft. But Rhett's instincts never lied. Somewhere down the street, an engine purred. Not the kind of rumbling growl they used, but the thin, sharp whine of a small car moving too slow to be casual. Rhett straightened. Cass noticed. "You expecting someone?" Rhett shook his head once. "No." The car stopped outside. A few seconds passed. Then the sound of a door opening, followed by another. Rhett stepped out of the warehouse, hand resting on the handle of a rusted crowbar by the wall. Sunlight hit the wet asphalt, throwing blinding reflections. At the curb stood two men, one in a suit, the other wearing a plain jacket. The suited one smiled too easily. "Morning. We're looking for a woman who was seen around here last night. Black, early 20s, curly hair. Might have caused some trouble." The way he said trouble made Cass's fists tighten. Rhett's jaw flexed. "You police?" The man smiled wider. "Private investigators. Hired by the gentleman you helped the officers detain last night." Rhett's grip on the crowbar tightened. Inside, Alicia froze as the words reached her. Her heart dropped like a stone. She thought he'd be locked up, gone, but no. Monsters with money didn't vanish. They just changed masks. Cass moved closer to the doorway. "You need to leave." The suited man's tone stayed casual. "We just want to talk to her. Clarify some misunderstandings before things escalate legally." Rhett took a slow step forward. "You walk another inch, and I'll show you what escalation looks like." The second man, the quiet one, reached inside his coat. That single movement made every biker stand instantly. Metal scraped, boots shifted. "Hands where I can see them," Rhett growled. The quiet man froze, then slowly pulled out a folded paper, a fake court notice. "She's wanted for questioning in a property vandalism case," he said flatly. "We're within our rights." Cass snatched it from his hand, scanned it, and laughed bitterly. "You think we can't tell a printout from a legal notice? Get off this street before I make sure your boss has a real case to cry about." The men exchanged looks, realizing this wasn't the scared woman from last night anymore. She wasn't alone now. The suited one sighed, stepping back toward his car. "This isn't over," he muttered. Rhett didn't blink. "It is for you." They left, tires splashing through puddles, the car vanishing around the corner. When the sound faded, Rhett turned toward the warehouse door. Alicia stood there, pale, shaking, tears in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from the crushing truth of what safety really meant. It was never permanent. It had to be fought for, again and again. Rhett stepped closer. "He's not going to stop," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "But neither are we." That afternoon, the bikers gathered around the long metal table in their back room. Old maps, cameras, and phones covered the surface. They weren't planning revenge. They were planning exposure. Cass had already pulled up a local database. "He's connected," he said grimly. "Private contractor. Donates to the mayor's campaign." No wonder the cops hesitated. Rhett exhaled. "Then we do what they won't." The rest nodded. They started gathering footage, street camera feeds, photos, messages Alicia had saved. Every note he'd left, every time she'd called for help and been ignored. Each file became a piece of evidence, a truth the system had refused to see. Hours passed. The warehouse buzzed with purpose. Alicia sat quietly, watching these strangers turn her pain into a mission. It wasn't vengeance. It was reclamation. By evening, they had built a case stronger than anything a courtroom could twist. Rhett uploaded it anonymously to the press and tagged every advocacy group he could find. And then they waited. The storm broke faster than any of them expected. Within hours, headlines flooded the city's news feeds. Influential businessman arrested again. New evidence suggests pattern of abuse and stalking. Local biker club protects woman from retaliation after police failure. The story spread like wildfire. People began asking questions, the kind that made systems squirm. Why had the police ignored her? Why had he been released in the first place? By nightfall, the stalker's face was everywhere. The powerful mask he'd worn for years was shattered in public view. Inside the warehouse, the bikers watched the news silently. Alicia sat between them, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes. For the first time, justice didn't feel like a word. It felt like air. Rhett leaned back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "He's done," Cass said quietly. Rhett nodded. "Maybe, but this city's full of men like him." Alicia looked up at him, her voice steady. "Then maybe it's full of people like you, too." The room fell silent. Even Rhett didn't answer. The compliment wasn't just gratitude, it was a statement of faith. That somewhere in the cracks of society, kindness still fought back. Outside, thunder rolled again, but this time it didn't sound like danger. It sounded like closure. The news cycle didn't let go. For days, Alicia's name, once whispered only by a monster, was now spoken by millions. Her face appeared on screens, her story printed on headlines she never asked for. The girl who ran. The bikers who helped. The man who fell. At first, she didn't know how to feel. Every click, every comment was a reminder of what had happened. But as she scrolled through messages from strangers, women, men, even teenagers, thanking her for speaking out, she began to realize something powerful. Her pain had become proof that silence could be broken. Rhett kept his distance from the cameras. Reporters tried to find him, but the old warehouse was off limits. He wasn't interested in fame. He'd done his part, but Alicia needed to see him one more time. 3 days later, as the city's sun sank behind a haze of pink clouds, she walked back to that same street, the one where her nightmare had ended. The rain had dried, but she could still hear its echo. She carried herself differently now. Shoulders straighter, steps steady, eyes unflinching. The warehouse door was open. Cass was working on a bike, grease on his hands, humming softly. When he saw her, he smiled. "You made the front page," he said. "I didn't want to," she replied, half smiling. Rhett appeared from behind the counter, same worn jacket, same calm presence. "You holding up?" She nodded. "Better than I was." They sat near the heater again, the same spot where she'd first felt safe. Silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. "It was peaceful. I saw what you did," she said finally. "You didn't just help me. You made the world see him." Rhett's eyes stayed on the floor. "The world saw what it always ignored," he said quietly. "You just gave it a face." She looked at him, trying to find words big enough for what she felt. "You said your sister." He nodded once, eyes distant. "She was like you. Brave, strong." The system didn't believe her either. "I swore if I ever saw that story start again, I'd change the ending." The weight of that truth hung between them. 2 different lives, joined by the same wound, the world's blindness to pain that didn't fit its picture. She leaned forward, voice soft. "Then you did." "You changed it." Rhett didn't answer, but for the first time his shoulders eased. Outside, the sound of motorcycles echoed faintly as a few bikers rode past. Life was moving on, not forgetting, but healing. Later that evening, Alicia stood outside watching the sunset melt across the rooftops. She thought of all the women who'd never been heard, the ones who'd been dismissed, the ones who never found their Rhett or Cass. She made a silent promise. She wouldn't let her story stop here. A month later, a small non-profit organization began posting online under the name Keep Watch, inspired by the motto stitched above that warehouse door. It started as a hotline for women facing stalking and harassment, then grew into a network. Bikers volunteered for escort rides. Survivors shared their stories anonymously. Lawyers reached out. News stations began covering it. Alicia never sought credit. But when people recognized her name, she didn't hide from it anymore. One evening, as she spoke at a small community event, her voice no longer trembled. "Sometimes justice doesn't come from the system," she said to the crowd. "Sometimes it comes from the people who've been broken by it, the ones who know what it feels like to be unheard." The applause wasn't loud, but it was real. Back at the warehouse, Rhett watched her speech replay on an old TV Cass had rigged near the bar. The others gathered around, quiet, proud. Cass smirked. "You think she'll come back?" Rhett took a sip of his coffee, eyes fixed on the screen. "She already did more than come back. She made sure no one else runs alone." Outside, the same street that had once been a hunting ground now felt like a place of memory and warning. The flickering streetlight had been replaced. The city had painted a mural there, a woman running, light behind her, and a row of bikes forming a protective line in front. At the bottom were 3 words: "Keep watch, always." Alicia saw it one night while passing by in a cab. She smiled, not out of pride, but peace. The image wasn't about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever felt invisible. Every voice silenced. Every survivor told they didn't belong. As the city lights shimmered across her reflection in the window, she whispered softly to herself, "I belong everywhere I stand." For the first time, she believed it. Final message, audience. Takeaway evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a smile, a badge, or a business suit. But what destroys evil isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's exposure. Sometimes it's people who refuse to look away. And if you've ever been told you don't belong, remember this: you don't need permission to exist safely. You only need courage to stand, and others will rise beside you. So tell me, would you have stopped for her?